Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, and thank you to the testifiers. Actually, before Mr. Peters leaves, could he give us the numbers once again that he cited on the warrants, the traffic stop warrants and arrests that were resulting? I didn't quite get those numbers down.
6,200, so the Minnesota State Patrol data from 2018 to present shows that out of 1.18 million traffic stops in our state, 6,217 were for warrants and 932 for firearms.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up?
Senator Latz.
Mr. Peters, do you have the data on what was the reason for the stop broken down? Were they equipment violations or what might be characterized as non-safety related conduct that led to the stop? Or was this, did they run the plates and got registered owner, came up with warrants? So there were warrant checks before the stop was made? Was it driving conduct such as DWIs or swerving or erratic driving that led to the stops that resulted in running the individuals in the vehicle to see if there were warrants and so on? Do you have that breakdown?
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, I don't, but I can certainly try to get that information and submit it to the committee.
Thank you.
Mr. Peters, I believe that information was accumulated by our state troopers. And just as a source, I'm sure Mr. Peters could dig into that a little bit, but I wanted the record to show that that figure came from the state troopers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I guess part of the reason for my question is to put this into context. I think just evaluating the numbers as they were presented alone is insufficient for us to understand the value and importance of traffic stops and so on. I'm not going to try to figure out the percentages here, but 7,000 out of 1.8 million stops is a fairly low percentage anyway. So I think there's one question that I think County Attorney Choi was addressing, which is what's the value of making a huge number of stops when for non-safety related driving issues, and what do you get in return for those? Not to minimize the crimes that were committed or the warrants that were out there and so on, but maybe resources are better directed in other forms of investigation. But Mr. Chairman, that was a little bit of a diversion from what I had raised my hand to speak to, but while Mr. Peters was here, so if I may, I listened very carefully and with great interest to our law enforcement testifiers. They're on the front lines. They provide incredible insight and value and expertise in the question before us, which is what are the causes and what can we do about rising levels of crime. I note it was interesting from Sheriff Fletcher that these trends began before the pandemic and before the George Floyd murder, and we could have a whole hearing just on those issues alone. But my concern is with the scope of the hearing here today and with the range of testifiers we have. As I said, they're a very valuable and important piece in this puzzle, but it seems to me this hearing is an inadequately narrow approach to the task it sets out to accomplish, which is determining the causes of the increase in crime. We acknowledge the increase in crime and its impact on individuals and on the community as a whole. And as Mr. Peters said, no one should have to become a victim of crime. But there are many additional sources of expertise available to consider when seriously trying to solve this problem. And those sources were explicitly excluded by the committee chairs from participation in this hearing. They include criminologists, public health experts, mental health community advocates, youth intervention experts, experts on the impact of the pandemic on crime and on the impact of law officer misbehavior, such as in the George Floyd case, on community trust, and on the proliferation of crime. But the chairs of this hearing did not invite these voices to the table. In fact, I was very explicitly informed by the committee that they would be prohibited from testifying at this hearing, were we to suggest any non-law enforcement people to testify. So the narrow focus of this hearing on law enforcement comes nowhere near the breadth of an inquiry that would be necessary to address the problem. And we couldn't even remedy this limitation by suggesting one or two additional law enforcement participants, as we were invited to do by the staff. So again, I appreciate the testimony. But Mr. Chairman, we have right in our community here some incredibly experienced experts in crime. We have Professor Gillian Peterson, a nationally recognized criminologist, a professor at Hamlin. We've got Professor James Densley, who chairs the School of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice at Metropolitan State University and is a longtime expert on street violence in cities. Even cited in the Pioneer Press article that I believe was included in packets, not entirely sure, but it was just about a week ago. Gary LaFree is currently a professor at the University of Maryland's Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Professor Randolph Roth of Ohio State University's Criminal Justice Research Center. Professor John Gould, who is a criminologist most recently at Arizona State University and now at a California university directing their programs. There is a wide range of people whose lifetimes have been dedicated to exploring the causes of crime, the pattern and history of crime, and not to mention mental health experts and others. So if we really want to solve this problem, I think we need to look much more broadly than hearing from the law enforcement testifiers that we did today. I do have some questions which I'm going to save for a little bit later as some others have an opportunity to participate in the hearing as well. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator Latz. Senator Latz, this hearing was not to review the causes of crime in our world. We are noticing a very sharp uptick in violent crime, especially in the metropolitan area. But it's also, as our police officials have said, criminals are transit, and this criminal activity is moving into or outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul proper. I do know that there's lots of opinions on what the cause of crime is, but we are reviewing what is happening right now and right in recent time regarding crime and the rise in crime, and how police are acting and how our prosecutors are reacting to that same crime. Everyone seems to be talking about it. Whenever I go out for coffee or go to a restaurant, to go to church, everyone is coming up to me with the concern, what are you guys doing about prosecutors not prosecuting crime? Police officers now, even on the ride-in today, there was talk that a police officer doesn't feel like he should even arrest someone because the prosecutors are not even going to prosecute. This is an acute problem in the metropolitan area, especially. I fear that it's moving, sprawling into outlying areas. Even the Star Tribune, crime but no punishment. Even they're concerned about it. Reporters in the Star Tribune are concerned about it. And they have a number of people that they've interviewed, not only in law enforcement, but in just everyday folks that are concerned about the safety of their children. When you have little kids getting shot off a trampoline, that should be our #1 concern. And I believe that we have to react quickly. We have to try and understand the problem. We have a long session ahead of us. If we were going to try and delve into the causes of crime, sociologists and criminologists have been studying that for hundreds of years, and we still haven't figured out why people do what they do to other people. But nevertheless, we do have the power to react to crime. That's not to negate the possibility of analyzing the causes of crime, But for the 2 hours we have today, this is the focus of our attention. So I believe that this may be just a beginning, well, not a beginning, an ongoing discussion. So
Well, Mr.
we'll open
Chairman.
it up for more questions. Senator Latz.
Just briefly, the criminologists, they have figured out a lot about why people do what they do. We've had a lot of proposals over the last couple of years to specifically address some of that. And many of those proposals never got hearings in the Senate. So there are a lot of underlying causes, a lot of underlying issues, including adequate funding through our own public safety department and for community programs, intervention programs. So when we get an opportunity, I've got some ideas of proven crime prevention solutions that are currently being drafted in a bill form in the other body, which I have some specific information on. And there's data that backs up the effectiveness of programs like this. So we just have to be willing to listen and be willing to act when those are presented to us, and perhaps broaden our perspective on what it takes to prevent crime. But I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.